Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me. My name's Susie Bayley, and welcome to the From ST to GP afternoon session. We hope you're going to have a really good afternoon. I'm Medical Director for the GP Task Force in Derbyshire, which runs quite a lot of projects to support you, both as GP trainees and throughout your career, and you'll be hearing from some of the other support that's available elsewhere in the RCGP Vale of Trent region. So just a few housekeeping tips, as my job is to try and keep everything to time. So it's the first time that we've done this, so please bear with us and be as patient as you can. Hopefully the technology will work. I'm sure you've been in many Zoom meetings that haven't quite worked. We will be using some interactive functions today. So we're going to try that out. So I know I've got a few people who've got raised hands. If everyone could try raising their hands if they can hear me. Brilliant, I think that's working. Now, even more importantly, if you can try lower your hands, that would be great as well. The next thing we're going to be talking about is the chat function. So you probably use the chat through other Zoom meetings. So we'll be using this just to talk to one another, to share some relevant information. Any comments are really welcome. So please use that throughout. It's really useful to set that to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone can see what they need to. We are recording today, but the chat won't be recorded. So that's just between us for this afternoon. If you want to ask a question, however, please don't use the chat function and instead use the Q&A function, which you'll be able to see on the screen there. We will be addressing questions and answers as we go along, but we'll save most of them towards the end. You can ask these anonymously if you want to, and that's absolutely fine. We hope you have a great afternoon. We've taken on board lots of your recommendations and requests for what to put on this event. So I'm going to hand you over to Zarina Begg, who's the driving force behind today. Zarina is the Royal College of GP's Vale of Trent Education Lead. So Zarina, over to you.
Hi everyone, hope you can all see me and hear me. Thank you, Susie, for the introduction and welcome. And thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. As Susie said, I'm Dr. Begg and I'm the Vale of Trent Faculty Education Lead. I'm also a GP in Nottingham, and I've been working together with the Phoenix Progamme in Nottinghamshire and the Derbyshire Task Force to bring this event to you. I also must mention Christine Johnson, who's the treasurer for the faculty of the Vale of Trent, who's also helped this collaboration come together. So thanks, Christine. For those of you who aren't aware about the Phoenix Progamme and the Derbyshire Task Force, they'll be speaking later on to explain their role, their valuable role for GPs who are new to practice in the Vale of Trent region. We know that you've all been working extremely hard at the moment in really difficult circumstances, and your ST3 year is a challenging enough year as it is, never mind with the added current issues. So I just want to take a moment to thank you all for your hard work and your resilience at the moment. Hopefully you'll find some benefit from today. The aim of today was to replace the AIT Leavers event that was due to happen in April but had to be cancelled because of COVID-19. We hope to cover some of the important issues for new to practice GPs. We know a lot has changed, and there's still a lot of uncertainty about what working as a GP will look like in the coming few months. With that in mind, there's always some constants in life, and one of those constants are things like having to look for a job or needing a CV. So we hope to bring you some of those key constant topics to you as part of a series of events, hopefully. Today's event is based on feedback from some of the Vale of Trent trainees who were surveyed and felt that employment and looking for a job was the most pressing at the moment. And we hope to cover other issues like appraisals and revalidation in the future. So let me introduce our varied and talented speakers. We have Dr. Jo Arthurs, who's a GP partner at the Newthorpe Medical Centre in Eastwood. She has completed a fellowship in medical education and has a postgraduate certificate of medical education. And she also works as a GP tutor for the Trainee Transition Conference for the Phoenix Progamme. We have Dr. Andrew Foster, who's a GP partner at the Parkside Medical Practice in Bulwell, a director of the Nottinghamshire GP Alliance, clinical director of Bulwell and Top Valley PCN, and a member of the Vale of Trent Faculty Board. We have Dr. Gail Walton, who's the Executive Director of Derbyshire GP Task Force and a member of the Derby and Derbyshire LMC. She's also a GP partner, GP appraiser, and a mentor on the GPS scheme, which is a support scheme for GPs. And we also have Dr Gemma Wilkinson, who's a GP at Hucknall Road Medical Centre in Nottingham. She's been involved in both undergraduate teaching at the University of Nottingham and postgraduate education. More recently, she's become the lead for the Phoenix Progamme as an educational lead. Last but by no means least, we have Dr James Waldron, who's a former Health Education England GP Fellow and a Portfolio GP in Nottingham. He's a co-lead and CCG lead for the First Fives in Nottingham and works with the Nottingham Training Hub and the Phoenix Progamme. So over to you, James, to take us to our first event, Setting the Scene.
Well, thank you very, very much, Zarina. Thank you for that lovely introduction. As Zarina said, my name's James. I'm a GP working in Nottingham and various other things as well for First Five. And my role today is to kind of introduce everybody to the situation. So first of all, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me and they can see the PowerPoint. So if you might raise your hands just so I can see whether you can hear me clearly. Fantastic. That looks like there's at least 53 people that can see me. So that's brilliant. Also, I want to make this as interactive as possible, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat as we go through. So if people have anything they want to comment, anything they want to say as we go along, please pop it in there. So what am I going to cover today? The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to try and just kind of explore what it is like going from being an AIT to being a GP. Something I went through fairly recently, and actually something I think worth exploring. I also want to look at how things are changing. What actually is different and how we're moving forwards, especially considering things that have been happening recently. And then also want to touch on job market and the different options for practicing medicine at the moment. It's all got a little bit complicated, and we're going to touch on this much more completely in further sessions. But I just wanted to mention that because it sets up a lot of what else we're talking about. So without further ado, what is different post-CCT? I just want to give you a minute here for your thoughts, things that you think that might be different post-CCT. Pop it in the chat, make sure it can get seen by all panelists and attendees, and then we'll just kind of see how things go. Yeah, so certainly supervision, Iona says that's certainly changed, and the support is definitely different. So not there, so it is there, sorry, but it does change as we go through. Seeing more patients, well, that can certainly happen, but as we'll sort of discover, there's a lot more control you can have with that. Freedom, that's a really important thing. Thank you very much for that. Freedom, independence as well, those two things go together. Definitely things that happen as we move into general practice. Flexibility. A workload as well, yeah, that can certainly increase, but also can, I think, often just changes as opposed to increasing. Yeah, certainly money can be certainly a driving factor and something worth thinking about, especially as you go through. Different appraisal and validation. I think it's different more than not there at all. And time to develop a specialist interest. Thank you so much for mentioning that. It's really important. Well, that's really great comments from the group there. Please feel free to keep filtering them through. But the way that I've sort of conceptualized this is breaking them down into different areas, which are autonomy, flexibility, independence, and stimulation. And I think these four things, at least to me, as I moved into being a GP from being an AIT, and as I'm a First Five, are things that resonate with me the most. So autonomy. You now have the capacity and the opportunity to decide what you do, when you do it, how much you do, and to a certain degree, how much you charge for that. And that's something very different and something that a lot of us won't have been used to if we've gone straight through from being a medical student to being an F1, F2 and the like. And actually this can be a bit of a wrench. All of a sudden we have to start sort of forging ahead and making our own path. And that autonomy can be great, but a little scary. Flexibility. This is super important and something that I've found has really brought me into my own as I come into my practice as a First Five. The hours that we work are different and we can determine what they are to a degree. The different work types we can do, whether that's clinical, whether that's different aspects of clinical, different sessions that we want to do, and actually saying, right, well, this is how I want to do it and the sessions I want to work and the time I want to do it. And that can be really liberating. And as lots of people mentioned in the chat, independence is a new thing here. Now, that can be really great in a lot of respects, and you can determine what you do. But it does come with an increase in responsibility. At this point, the buck starts to stop with you. But it doesn't mean that we can't balance that with the support that's provided by our colleagues, by organisations such as the Phoenix Progamme and the Task Force, and other places in the country, different things there to support you. Your style of consulting is your own. It's very individual. And whilst you've spent the last few years sort of developing that can change as you go through, and you become known as a particular type of GP and a particular style of practicing. But also it can be quite isolating, and finding ways to mitigate that is really important, and coming up with strategies is really important too. And stimulation. I think I've been the most stimulated and the most interested in my career than I've ever been over the last few years. It has become extremely varied. It is personalised to me. It is exactly what I want to make of it, and I go out and I find those opportunities. And hopefully today we can start to introduce you to some of those opportunities. And it is never boring. Managing, being able to be involved in an event like this with such interesting and wonderful people is such a great thing to come across. And actually, you can do things that you never thought you'd get into after your AIT. And it can be quite fast-paced. So there's an awful lot going on, and I've had a few very busy weeks, but that can all be part of the stimulation here. So hopefully that sounds good. Hopefully there's things there that are that suit you and that you think that might be able to fit in with your work going forwards. So just moving straight on now. So how are things changing? And things really are changing. We are in the midst of change. Change is what keeps us going. Change is what keeps medicine and general practice particularly on our toes. And I suspect it's probably been around, and people have been following this very closely. But these guys have forced some of this change and encouraged it and sped it along its way. So what has changed? So what has actually changed in this? And I'd like people to have a think of one thing that has changed for them, one thing that's changed in general practice, and if you write bad or good in front of it and pop that in the chat, and we'll just kind of explore that as a concept. What has changed? Has it been good things that have changed? Has it been bad things that have changed? Pop your comments in the chat box there, and then we can sort of have a little look. I think because we're at the forefront of change, we are the best place to determine actually how to use that. Virtual consulting, absolutely great thing. Some challenges as well. Telephone calls, managing a list of calls. Yeah, and absolutely. And I think that being able to determine how we approach our workload is super important. Flexibility and absolutely risk, Joseph. That's a very, very important thing. And we have moved into a very different way of managing risk. And Emma, yep, reduced face-to-face, bad and good. Yes, that's absolutely right. Trying to determine who we bring in. Yep, absolutely, Charlie. The local market has changed enormously, and we'll look at that a bit today, and actually more as we go through these events. Technology more, absolutely. I love the fact that we can bring so many people together and save the planet to a degree as well. Less fuel burnt to have this meeting, so many people here, which is really awesome. A little bit more isolating, not as many home visits, fantastic, long may it last. And patients empowering themselves to look after themselves. That really, really interesting point. And I think that that has been a major change and something that we as a profession have been pushing for ages. Breaking bad news. Absolutely, and I'm glad. And I think a lot of the themes that have come up here are ones that I sort of identified. So these are what I sort of came across. So bad wise, so routine care has certainly been affected. And alongside that, referrals and trying to get people seen in the hospital or by the specialists has been even more challenging. I think it might be fair to say that in general practice, we've actually been spearheading this charge into change and into the way we're managing things. In the fact that we are doing much more remotely, much more management remotely, and I think secondary care are following in our path and actually moving forward with that. But it can be taking a little bit of a while. breaking bad news, bereavement, palliative care, this has all become majorly challenging. And a lot of the things that we would normally do as part of our core sort of GP skills are much more difficult in the way that we're trying to do it, and actually not something that we've necessarily trained for, although we've been sort of developing it as we're going along. And I think there's great ideas from the first 5 lots, and from you guys, from the AITs coming through. And care homes as well have become a problem. You know, there is difficulty within care home management of how we deal with the most vulnerable in our population. And certainly that has been a challenge. But as I'm so glad that people have been saying, there's been good that has come out of the problems here. We've undergone a digital revolution that we have been pushing through for ages and ages. Self-care is on the increase, and people are actually looking to think about how they might be able to protect themselves to a greater or lesser degree at home. And I'm not sure if other people have experienced this, and maybe a quick show of hands, but have people been finding that that people are more willing to self-care and accept self-care advice? Yeah, certainly a few people. That's brilliant. I'm glad to hear it. Huddles have been great, and as an extreme extrovert, I love the fact that we're getting together more with our peers and more with our colleagues. And I think we've been recognised as well. You know, the clap for carers has been actually a really good validation and recognition of what we do. And I think finally, again, in fact, as a counterpoint to care homes, both good and bad, that the way we're approaching this situation, the support that we're offering, which I think is long overdue, is starting to gain traction. So are we experiencing an evolution of primary care? Well, I think so. And I must say that I keep coming to this statement here as necessity is the mother of all invention. And necessity has really been pushing us forward, and we've had to do things, and we've had to, you know, create. And whilst I absolutely miss delivering this material in person and with a lovely meal that goes with it, I'm afraid you're going to have to provide your own snacks and tea and coffee for this one. This has really allowed us to really push forward and create some new things. So let's just make sure my slide goes forward. We have newer consultation models, telephone use, the digital revolution, and the workload has certainly changed. And in some cases it is reduced, and in some cases it is just changed, only that. Risk management has become different. And again, I think as we move forward, as we evolve general practice, our ability to manage risk and our ability to approach risk is going to become easier, and we're going to start to learn how we can calibrate ourselves with the new way of the world. A holistic management, I think, is really improved too. And we're bringing, and by the very nature of what we're having to do, we're bringing patients more into their own consultations. And I think as we move forward, the future is really interesting. I think it's really uncertain, but I genuinely think that we as AITs and soon to be first fives are really there forging ahead and determining what that is going to be. So whilst a scary time, it's a really, really exciting and interesting time. So finally, and just to moving on here, and we'll explore this in a lot greater detail in the future, but actually the job market and the different options for practicing have become very different, and things that people might have wanted to do or the way that they might have understood it have certainly been changing. So there are a lot of different options, and broadly broken into 3 sort of categories, although this may well change. So partners, salaried, locum, these are the main sort of 3 areas. And of course, you might consider it that you have a choice. The world is your oyster at the moment, and you can make a mixture of the different things. So I'm just really interested to know where people are, and we're going to try and use another little bit of here. I'm going to try and poll everybody. So the first thing, we're just going to give a quick test. I'm going to launch a quick poll here, and if it should pop up on your screen, I would just quite like to know, just to make sure that the technology is working, fill in the poll. Let's see how we go. We'll make sure that a few people can do it. And I'm really glad for the 4 people, the people that evidently Douglas Adams fans, a full 10% here. So here we go. I'm going to share the results with you. So evidently the overwhelming result here is the answer is blowing in the wind. However, 42 I also think is a very valid answer, as it is the answer to life, the universe and everything. So I'm going to bring in the poll here. So thinking about yourself, and again, please try and choose one. But over the next few years, what are your thoughts? Do you have any plans to be a partner? Excellent, really great response to the polling here. Because every year we're asked this, every year we're sort of given this option, and it's always quite interesting and quite telling as to how people vote. Let's have a little look here. So we'll pop it up, share up, and as we can see here, actually most people are thinking at some point, and that's the majority of us, 38%. And some people thinking about doing that. The 25% people thinking of doing it in the near future. And it's really interesting because a few years ago, when I was qualifying, just 2.5 years ago, I think that was very different. And it's actually quite interesting to see that people are moving forward with that. So asking the same question, but for salaried. So I'm going to ask you again. So in the next few years, in your sort of overall plan. Oh, it says partner, but it actually means salaried. Oh, I'm just going to quickly relaunch that. Sorry. I'm going to relaunch that. Sorry. There we go. Here we go. So I plan to become a salaried doctor in the next 2 years, next 5 years, at some point, never. You can put no, I have no idea if you absolutely have no idea, but try and avoid that. Fantastic. 76 people voted. That's really great. Thank you so much for engaging this. We're trying out some new things. So sorry for a little, maybe some teething issues here. So here we are. And I think that's really interesting. So in the next 2 years, 78% of people are thinking of becoming salaried. And that's certainly different. And if people like to put some comments in the box there, we'll just have a little reflection on that later about what's brought you to make that as part of your plan. Okay, so and then finally, as you might be no surprise to people, the next one is going to be locum. And so I plan to become a locum in the next 2 years, next 5 years at some point. And of course you can add this, even if you've put a strong one for the other thing. If you want to be a salaried and a locum, of which I've done a fair amount of the last couple of years, please pop that in. Brilliant, and thank you so much for your engagement. This is really great. We're trying to use a few different bits and pieces to find out exactly how you guys are feeling. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So, and again, I think a lot of people are looking at that. So it's about 50%, but it's in fact changed quite significantly over the last couple of years. That's really interesting things. And a lot of people at some point are thinking that that is going to be part of their practice. Right, super. So has anybody got any thoughts on that? Any thoughts about how they might have changed over the coming years? We can sort of put that forwards. It's a question of trying to how to choose what it is that you want from your career, what it is that you want to go through. So in some respects, so being a partner, a few thoughts I had is you are own boss and you are in charge of your finances, which can be quite healthy, I understand. And you have a great deal of autonomy of how to go through. As I said, we're going to explore this in great detail in another thing. This is just general overview. You're the boss, however, and some of the things that might be more challenging is there'll be more paperwork. There can be more workload, and certainly the buck stops with you. And being a manager of other people has its benefits, but can be quite challenging. Salaried can be quite predictable. It is secure. And there's also maternity and maternity pay. And I think that the COVID pandemic has certainly reframed that in a lot of our minds. But we do have a little bit of less agency, and the remuneration may not be quite the same as in partner or locuming. And the workload can also be quite high. Flexibility in locuming is really important, and remuneration can be very good. And the autonomy to choose what it is that you do and where it is you go and how it is you work can be great, especially if you have a family or other interests. But again, as been framed by the pandemic recently, it can be more unstable. The availability can be a bit up and down. And actually managing your own finance and your business can be quite stressful. But actually, a mixture of all can be the way forwards. Mixture of all can be the way forwards, and certainly thinking about clinical, non-clinical work with specialist interests and the many hats. And this is a phrase that I borrow from Christine. We wear many hats, and lots of us have different roles in different areas. But really, the world is your oyster. Determine what you want and go and get in. Hopefully over the rest of today, we can help you achieve that. We're here to support you, and we're going to explore more about the different types of working in later events. So please feel free to tune in for those. And without further ado, I will hand over to my colleague, Dr. Foster, but first of all, to Dr. Bayley. So thank you so much. Please keep the comments coming, and we'll do our best to address them as we go forward. Thank you.
Thanks, James. That was brilliant. So next we're going to hand over to Andy Foster, and Andy's going to talk to you about applying for a job. So over to you.
Hello to everybody. It's always a pleasure to speak to ST3s and AITs. This is such an important event, and I'm really glad that we've been able to put it on in some form again this year. It's such an important transition, and it's really important to support people through as they move from AIT and into the world of work, because it can throw up some difficulties. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in this event for the last 5 years, and I've given a similar talk each year. And each year has its own distinct flavour. This year, I think COVID-19 is causing probably more concern about looking for work than people have experienced in the past. Obviously, thankful to everybody for all the work they're doing with COVID. And like a lot of things, this will pass. So people are worried about the effect it's potentially having on the job market. And I know that a lot of the local posts that people who are moving from ST3 into GP often like to do to get a sense of different practices and what's happening in the jobs market and so forth appear to have temporarily reducing their availability. The message I have about that is that all things pass, things will change, and I'm sure within a few months we'll be back to business as usual. So just don't want people to get too anxious. So just moving on, and I'm hoping I can move to my next slide. There we go. So I'm Dr. Andy Foster. I finished training about 10 years ago now. That was in Birmingham. So I moved back to Nottingham to begin practicing as a GP. So I've had that experience of moving locations at the same time as transitioning from ST3 to AIT. And that was an interesting experience. I would consider myself a portfolio GP. And it was interesting just reflecting on James's talk that actually, whilst my main role is a partner at my GP practice, I do actually receive a salary for some other roles, and I do claim for more ad hoc work, which is a bit like being a locum. So I think I probably have a little bit of a mix of all of those as well. Wearing lots of hats, that's a phrase that comes up quite a lot. Maybe it did come from Christine. And some of those are on the screen. What's interesting is since qualifying as a GP, I have had the experience of applying for additional jobs and developing into additional roles, which I think is an important concept to hold on to. And I've also had the privilege of interviewing and recruiting people within these various roles as well, to the primary care network, to the federation, and sort of been involved in recruiting C-suite people, so that's sort of chief operating officer type people. So that's always interesting too. So without further ado, let's move forward. So I'm a bit of a fan of royalty-free stock images, and sometimes it throws up a gem. I think that a good analogy when thinking about looking for a job is this dating analogy, which comes up every now and again, because I think it gives us lots of interesting ways to think about different aspects of preparing for and looking for a job. And also it can make the topic a little bit more fun because it can be a little bit dry. So I've done this over the years with different AITs, and it's something that people always feel anxious about. Often you find that people haven't applied for a post or a specific job for many years. Sometimes people have never actually applied for a specific defined individual job as an individual person. People have often applied to medical schools, a cohort of people applied to GP training. So this is sometimes in some people's life the first time they've actually applied for something as an individual. So when you talk to AITs, they often tell you, I'm worried, not experienced in this. It's a long time since I've done it. And so people are often keen to get some tips. So what are we going to cover today? Well, continuing the dating analogy, I think that finding a job is a bit like a matchmaking problem. And there's also two sides to every relationship. So whilst it's important for the trainee or the GP to find the right job, you'll find that often the practice or the organisation, they're really keen and often quite anxious about finding the right person as well. So it's important to try and make things as painful for both sides. And of course, like with any relationship, if you end up with a bad match, it can be disastrous and everybody can be really miserable. So it's in everybody's interest to make it right. So over the next 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to try and walk you through the first step, which is actually before you go out and look for other people, you need to do a little bit of work with yourself first. Learn to know yourself, love yourself. That way other people can get to know you and love you as well. And you'll know how to present yourself properly to other people. So that's an important piece of work to do. Then you need to find your matches, and it's important to meet lots of different practices. When you're meeting practices, when you're looking at adverts, it's important to know how to read between the lines, how to develop a bit of that emotional job intelligence that allows you to think about and identify actually what do they want, what are they looking for. Helps you choose whether you are right for them, and also helps you potentially present yourself in the right way so that they know that they are right for you and you are right for them as well. We'll talk a little bit about doing your homework and due diligence. So that's really researching a practice, and there's lots of interesting resources and ways that you can go about doing that. Again, to help you know if you're right for each other, but also so that you've got insights that you can use and drop in there when you're interacting with them to show that you're the sort of person that does the homework, that prepares, and that really tries to understand whether it's a good match. It's important to have some moves. So, the chat up lines, all of those things, which sometimes people get rusty of if they've been out of the dating market for a while, like many AITs have, jobs dating market, that is. So there are skills, there are strategies, there are tactics, and you've got to know about them and also, practice and know how to execute them. And of course, as with love and jobs and everything else, it's really, really important to be honest, respectful, and fair, and represent yourself appropriately and correctly, and expect that they will do the same as well. They might not always do that, but for the most part they will, because hopefully you'll have a long and happy life together. You've got to live with each other after this. So we'll be looking at who you are, what do you want, how to find practices and jobs, how to read an advert, read between the lines, research a practice, get an idea of what they're about. We'll talk about the informal visit. We'll talk about writing a cover letter. There's more about CVs later on in the program. And we'll talk about tackling the interview, some tips around that, and then a little bit on negotiating. And it will be a whistle-stop tour. You could do a tour probably on each individual element of this. And you'll get my perspective and take on it. You can go and watch YouTube, read a book about these things, but you can only get my perspective here. So that's what you're going to get. Thanks for applying. It was great to meet you. We all enjoyed talking to you during the interview process, but unfortunately you haven't been successful. It was a strong field, and the post has been awarded to another candidate. I'm very sorry. So rejection doesn't feel very good. And as we've discussed, a lot of people who have gone through medical school and GP training aren't necessarily used to rejection, or used to not getting the job or the role or the promotion or what they want. So learn to expect and deal with rejection. So it's important, just getting the right mindset. And also the COB learning cycle is here. So deal with these setbacks, which you are bound to experience, well, and reflect on them. You don't necessarily have to put this in your PDP or your appraisal, your e-portfolio, but do reflect, ask for feedback, and think about how you can improve and do better next time. So without further ado, let's get down to some nuts and bolts. So in order to get what you want, you need to understand yourself so that you can represent yourself effectively. And there's lots of ways that you can do this. You could do a SWOT analysis. There's all sorts of other tools. But this trainee has made a list. So this youngish lady, GP, let's imagine her. So she partially completed a surgical training. So she's not quite typical prior to doing a VTS scheme. So she's quite good at a minor surgery. She's done the relevant courses. She enjoyed training juniors as part of her previous role in the hospital, done a bit of that going through her GP training. She's got 2 young children. They're at a fee-paying school. And her partner has quite a flexible role, actually. So he's able to lead with the childcare. So you don't have to use this list, but I would suggest make a list. Think about what you can offer. What do you offer? What's unique to you? What's your USP? Before then going on to think about what things might be important to you in a job. Make some notes and grade them. So this young lady says she's got her surgical skills, an experience, interest in leadership and training from a previous job. She thinks she's calm under pressure and stress, so she feels quite confident as a new GP attacking the role. Doesn't feel like she'll need too much support. She does some aid work in Africa. That might be an interesting talking point to drop into a CV or a cover letter or a conversation somewhere so that people might ask more. Allows her to show how rounded she is. She's interested in challenge, career progression, income. She needs to pay these school fees. And she's interested in security because she has a family. So what type of role is she interested in? Well, so she'd like a salaried role. She wouldn't say no to a partnership, actually, because some of her friends have partnerships. So she's quite happy to do that. If you think about partnership, I mean, that's a whole different session as well, but the type of premises might be important. And I'm happy. We'll probably have a few minutes to take questions at the end. So do, if you've got specific questions about partnership, being a partner, I'm happy to answer those. Doesn't feel like she needs the support. Happy to commute. Flexible working, not too important to this lady, actually, but she does want something full-time. She wants opportunities to grow, use the skills that she's got. Not too fussed about the demographics. Some people are. Some people like to work with certain types of patients or don't like to work with certain types of patients. It's important to be honest in your self-reflection because you want a job that you will be happy with. She wants high pay and she likes a results-focused culture. Culture is really, really important, and it's actually important to get it right. And some places where you go, they're quite results-focused, quite money-focused. Other places are not. They're completely different. They value education or they value the connection with patients, and you need to identify that to know what you want. But not everything can be categorized on a list. Sometimes there's a spark. Zarina, were you coming in there?
Yes, there was just a question posted.
Cool.
By Laura. Do you think that you would do things differently if you have already worked at a practice during GP training that you enjoyed?
Oh gosh. So I think your experiences always affect what you want and where you see yourself going. So I'm just thinking where they were driving with that really. I think yes, it will have an impact. I think if you didn't enjoy working at a practice, that would also have an impact on what you might want to avoid in the future. And I know that it's quite a common thing that people often will stay on for a post at their training practice, won't they? Or perhaps come back even years later. I know we've had a few returners come actually from doing sort of F2 and things like that back to our practice. Hopefully that answers the question. If I've not, then ask it again with a little bit more detail. That would be great. Just back to the presentation, I was just saying, just be aware for things to come up and bite you as well. Love at first sight. You might locum at a rural practice, having never thought about that before, and you might love it. So it's not all list focused. So how to find practices. It's important to try and increase your touch points. So look surface area is a really interesting concept, I think, because, look doesn't exist, does it? Well, not really, but some people seem to attract positive outcomes. And this idea of increasing your look surface area is looking at that. It says, actually, if you want to increase the probability of something positive happening, then you can increase your contact points, your opportunities for that happen. And some people go out there and seek these contact points and opportunities and make yourself more sticky to positive outcomes. So I think that's a really interesting concept that I picked up recently. So you can apply that to looking for a job. So increase your touch points with practices. So do some locum sessions, meet people, talk to people when you go to events and educational events. And I suppose really what I'm talking about is building a network. And we might talk a little bit more about that in a second, because that's really, really important. If you don't have a network, you probably do have a network, but it needs some development. If you're genuinely new to an area like I was when I moved back to Nottingham in 2010, 2011, then you might have to build a network. all sorts of ways that you can do that. I think we might talk about first five groups later, but that is an amazing way of building a network. And when I came back to Nottingham, I got involved straight away with the first five network, and that led to involvement with the RCGP Vale of Trent faculty board. And that's been a really, really great experience for me. Met lots of people, really helped me build my network. And it's that network that you use to ask about a practice you might be interested in, ask around if people are aware of practices that have jobs, and you'll find that that's a really, really useful resource. Other places you can find about jobs are obviously job listing sites. There are lots of them. All of the local LMCs will run job listing boards. That's a really popular place that people post their adverts, really popular place to look for adverts. People will also look in the publications, BMJ, Pulse, GP Online. Something I did, and this may be really, really old-fashioned now, but when I moved back to Nottingham, I actually drew a circle around Nottingham of a few miles, and I sent a paper CV to every practice in that area, introducing myself, saying a little bit about me, and saying that I was looking for work. And I got some hits from that, including the practice where I work and became a partner. There may be more modern ways of doing that, but the principle's there. And we ran a job speed dating event at the Vale of Trent for the last few years. Unfortunately, COVID means we can't do that this year, but those sorts of events, if they exist, are really, really useful too. So did I say network? Yeah, so network is really, really important. It's something that doesn't really seem to matter that much when you're going through training or medical school or GP training, because the next rotation, the next post is always sort of organized for you. And no matter how much you network, you can't really make it a better one or a worse one. But when you get out into the wide world of work, it is so useful to have a good network. So if you see these people here, I don't know whether you can see my cursor. So these people would be the nodes. We all know them. Sometimes they're practice managers, sometimes they're friends, trainers, colleagues. These are the people that know other people and that are proactive in their communication. Get to know those people, and they can often find a job for you. Sometimes they'll find a job for you without even asking. And also reputation is important. So again, becomes more important after work, and it's something that you build over a long period of time. And not just your clinical care, but also just how you interact with people, how you respond to communications. Just be aware of that, and you can build your network capital over time in an area, and that increases your chance of getting a good job. So let's start researching jobs. So this is a job advert from the BMJ, and I've gone through wearing the hat of the young ex-surgeon, and I've identified this as a possible advert. So the pay's decent. So we're just going to read between the lines here. So the pay's decent. They like telling us that the pay is decent, which is interesting. Not all practices do that. So that might say something about the culture. It's a partnership, but I might be interested in that actually. And it's a partner retiring. So they're telling us why there's a partnership vacancy. And that's just important to try and think about, because sometimes partners can leave, or there can be a vacancy for negative reasons as well as positive reasons, including people moving on to retirement. It's a small practice actually, which I might be able to get over, but I'd often seen myself working in a larger practice. So that's something to explore. It's a training practice. That's good, because if we remember, I was interested in education and training. Premises, just amber circled that. We don't know whether it's owned or leased, and it's a partnership. That's going to be important. No out of hours requirement, minimal home visits. Okay, that sounds quite attractive to me. Good CQC inspection. Often interesting to know, when was the last inspection, because you might not want to go through an inspection in your first few years of being a new GP. And if they've recently had an inspection, then and they're good, then they might not be re-inspected for some time. Immediate parity following 3-month mutual assessment. That's interesting. That's a really good deal, but I wonder why it's so good. So let's be what's the TV show, CSI or 24, and start getting a little bit more forensic about looking at this practice. NHS Choices, really good place to look. So interesting here, 4 male GPs, no female GP. That's interesting. So they might be receptive to me as a female, but obviously they can't officially acknowledge a gender bias. But let's just have a look at that. Not many people responding to their friends and family, so that's why it's 100%. Let's dig out their CQC inspection from their last inspection. So this was in 2017. So they might go to 5 years without re-inspection, but they might be up for re-inspection soon. And if we look for things which are a bit unique in their CQC, bad things, yeah, they might be red flags which put you off a practice, but there might be things they can overcome as well. And CQC inspection regime can be quite harsh, so don't judge them too harshly. But patients found the appointment system easy to use. That you don't hear that very often, and they feel they can get access when they need it. Okay, let's make a note of that, because when we have contact with this practice, we might drop that in, say that was something that we saw in their CQC inspection and were impressed. Let's have a look. So they look to have quite a good attitude to education. The senior partner's the trainer, he's retiring, so that might mean something for their training status though, but they might be very keen for someone to do the training course, which is something that you're interested in. Public Health England do a fingertips site. You can search Google for it. You can find out really, really detailed information about practices. So I can see that they do really well on their 6-month cancer reviews, much better than the national average. We might say, oh, we noticed that, and ask them why. It looked like someone who's really done their homework. And GP patient survey is another good place to look. And it's interesting, they've not scored very well at all on speaking to their preferred GP. So might be something just to bear in mind. Not sure what that means at this stage. So yeah, we're doing our homework. There's a danger that you can appear too creepy, go too far. So, oh, I had a look on Facebook and I see that you like going to zoos, and you can go a little bit too far, but you want to appear like someone who is prepared. So we thought, let's take a look at this practice. The important thing to say, so it's something I need to say. Apparently, I may be wrong, but in America, you can date multiple people at the same time as long as you don't go beyond a certain level of commitment, as long as you don't go steady. And I think jobs are like that. You don't want to waste anyone's time, but you can obviously court a number of jobs and apply to a number of places at the same time. But this is one to look at. So let's go for an informal visit. So you can contact them, say, I'd like to come look around. This is a really great opportunity for you to look at them, and also them to look at you, and you to know that they're looking at you and know what is happening. So when you go, just drink in what the practice is like, sit in the waiting room for a while, observe, take the time to maybe talk to a patient, see who talks to you, who meets you, who shows you around, what's the feel for the place. This is where you can, so it's really good to ask those difficult questions that you don't want to sour the interview with. So what is the workload like? How many home visits do you get? Do you look after care homes? That might be something you like, something you don't. How's the paperwork shared out? What's the clinic structure? How many appointments in a morning and an afternoon? You can get all of those questions out of the way here rather than asking them at the interview. They sit much better here. Also, highlight any connections you might have. Oh, I worked with your ex-registrar, because if you plant that seed, they'll probably go and ask them and see what you like. So that's really, really helpful. Remember to be personable. Comes easily to some people, not to others, but you can ask soft questions. How long have you been here? What's it? Connections. This is where you could drop in a bit of flattery. Oh, I saw in your CQC report that you that people find it really easy to navigate the appointment system and they're pleased with the appointment system. That's unusual. How did you do that? So that's some really helpful tips there. I think the slides are available afterwards, so I won't cover all the details on the slide. So be aware that they're looking at you as well. So the practice will be paying attention. Do they know anyone that's worked with you? How can they get more information about you? So drop those names in. Be aware. So sometimes they'll play games with you. I've done this before. They might engineer a situation, see how you feel, see how you deal with somebody. They'll want to make a good impression as well. So if they're shooing you away from the waiting room, putting you in a different room, just be aware that that's what they're addressing. They might look for you on Google or Twitter. So just be wise to that. And they'll be sizing you up, looking for clues that you might be the right person or the wrong person. CV or cover letter. So I don't know, I think this became a bit old-fashioned at one point. People just send an email with their CV, but actually sending something else, perhaps on paper or as a PDF. PDFs tend to get printed by practice managers and handed to people, and they tend to find their way into the interview pack. So if you want to get something else in people's hands, then that's something that you can use. More on CVs later, but make sure that you are personalizing your CV and your cover letter for that job, the job that you want. Keep it punchy. We don't want anything too long because you want to get your points noticed. And this is a real great added opportunity to say why you are interested in the practice, that you felt so welcome when you went on the visit, that you felt they had a good culture. Say, so that's what attracted you there. think about how you will fit in and place yourself within their surgery. You know, I'm looking for my opportunities to build my minor surgery skills. I've got an interest in training. You know, really sell yourself and sell how you will help them with what you perceive from your research to be their goals. Refer to, you know, who did you speak to on the visit? Bev made me feel so welcome when I came along. Things like that, and maybe drop in some things about your past that you might want them to ask you about at the interview, like this trip to Africa, for example. So the interview. So yeah, so prepare and practice. They're not the same thing. Okay, so make sure you practice as well as prepare. Buddy up, do some practice interviews, grill each other. So the practice perspective. So what's happening the practice side? So there will probably be a panel. If they're doing things in a sort of proper, shall I say, way, or a more modern, let's use that word, way, they'll probably have a list of, they'll have a pack, they'll have a job specification, person specification, and a list of preset questions that they will go through with every candidate, and they will be grading your questions. They will be making notes. These notes are to help them make a decision about whether they like you. Oh, didn't realize that was so loud. That's my 5-minute point. They will be, they'll be making notes. It's to remember you, remember what you've answered. It's also to help them make the decision, but to justify that decision as well in the future, because people can sometimes, you know, ask for feedback, for example, so it helps them with that side of things. Sometimes they might ask you to do something different, like a presentation. And again, they'll be paying attention to perhaps soft skills more than any clinical content there, although that has to be correct. Are you creative? How do you approach the problem of doing that? Are you interesting? Would they like to work with you? And on that point, so normally they have a minimum skill or person specification in mind. And if you meet that, other factors become much more important. So do you add additional skills or experience, additional earning opportunities to the practice? You know, that minor surgery qualification might be very useful, particularly if somebody doesn't already do it. Similarly with training interests. But also, can they see themselves working with you? Are you an interesting person? Would you fit in? So they'll be looking at all of these factors. Right. Oh, and also be aware that they'll be trying to make a good impression. You'll often find that that 1 or 2 or 3 of them will love to talk, and they'll love to be listened to and to be asked questions about what they're saying, and that'll help you come across really well. And actually, if you can get into a position where you're having a conversation with people, then that's really good. But don't let it go too far, and make sure they've got time to ask you all the questions and finish the interview so they can judge you relative to all the other candidates. Interview question types. So there's a few different types that come up, and it's important to be prepared. Just as a general point, if you can have a repertoire of versatile anecdotes that will cover a number of situations when you've been challenged, when you've achieved something, when you've dealt with stress, when you've dealt with a difficult ethical dilemma, you can usually bend those to answer quite a lot of questions, because that's really what they tend to be driving at. So, and if you can't tell an anecdote, learn to tell one. So a good short story will have set the scene, there'll be characters, something will happen. There's normally a point of tension. If there isn't, it's nice to build it in, because that makes it a better story. Things resolve, and there's a lesson. You learn something, other people learn something, and it ends, and you stop talking. Some people don't stop talking in interviews, and that often doesn't go down very well. On the left, we've got the other sorts of questions they might ask. So it's useful. Tell us about yourself. I like that question when asking other people, because it really makes people squirm, and it's really interesting to see how they respond to that. My favorite way of dealing with that is just to say, I could talk about all sorts of things. If I'm missing what you're after, then please let me know. But probably the 3 most important things to know about me are that I'm really interested in X. I feel I've got a lot of experience in Y, and I'm really proud to have delivered on this. Just something like that is absolutely fine, and it gives them the opportunity to ask more. So other things I'm asked about is where do you see yourself in the future? Talk about being with the practice, obviously. Behaviour and quality questions are quite important now. Oh, and also, before I move on to my final slide about negotiation, just be wise that some questions are scenarios. So there might be driving at clinical decision-making, prioritization, ethics, and judgment. So recognize these, because you can get into a sense of being a bit wishy-washy on the wishy-washy questions, and then they'll ask you, okay, you know, there's this many patients, this patient's got chest pain, you need to switch back to clinical mode, because that'll allow you to then to score you appropriately on their scoring sheet. So just be wise to those types of questions. Do you have any questions? Yes, you do. So ask them some questions, anything, but you can think about questions beforehand, but it's really great to ask about something that came up in the interview, something interesting they said, give them a chance to talk more. How are they addressing something that came up? Maybe you have a solution for that. Or if you can't think of anything, just say, I've had a lovely time. You've made me feel really welcome. And finally, this is my final slide for those people worried about me overrunning slightly. Negotiating. This is something that is really awkward. And it feels really awkward because we don't do it a lot. Well, we do it a lot with patients, don't we? But not so much with colleagues. If I were to give one negotiating tip or tactic that's easy to use, it's the silent treatment. People often talk themselves out of a better negotiating position when they could have just waited. So, I'd like X amount per session per year. I think that's probably the going rate, and I've got the relevant skills. And then you can let them talk next. You don't have to talk yourself out of a good position. So just be aware what's going on. So the practice has some priorities. So negotiations generally around pay, but also around conditions, and you can give and take on each of these. So the practice will probably ask you for your salary expectations. So the practice are controlling some risks when they do this. They don't want to start too high. Practices often want to build in room to increase your salary in the future. So they're not just looking at what they'll pay you now forever, but they might want to reward you for career development, or they might need to keep you at some stage if you start to look elsewhere, and they might need to not pay you more than other people who do a similar job. So just be aware that they have those limitations, and they often ask you to ask around, find out what the going rate in your area is, and that's a decent place to start. You can make some accommodations if you want more or less flexibility, or you have more or less experience. And also be aware you can negotiate on other points as well. So if it's a GMS contract, they have to offer you the standard BMA contract, and always get your contract looked at by the BMA or somebody else before you sign it. But some things that people have also thrown in as negotiation points, which I think have been really interesting, are additional unpaid leave. Sometimes that's attractive, for the candidate, because they want more childcare flexibility to be able to take additional unpaid leave a certain amount per year. But actually, practice sometimes see that as a way of controlling costs on a post, so that can be good. Pension arrangements. Somebody once said, you can pay me as a limited company. I'll come and locum for 6 months. You don't have to pay the pension contributions. It's cheaper for you. And that was good. You might want to agree an uplift after 6 months. If you like me, pay me more. All sorts of things that you can negotiate on. I'm not going to talk about partnership because I think you can ask me questions about that if you like, but that is a whole different board game. I suppose what I will say is, make sure you look at several years' accounts, sit down with their accountant, sit down with your accountant, understand them. It's a big legal commitment, so get an independent legal opinion. The BMA can help with that, and think about if there's an exit strategy. Last man standing, green socks. If you don't know what these things are, then find out about them before you go into a partnership. So really, I'm going to finish there and take questions. I hope that some of those points have been helpful.
Thank you, Andy. I think what we'll do is we'll go over to the tea break, but you can answer the questions in the Q&A box. I will. Or during the tea break if you wish, and all the panellists will be looking at the questions in the Q&A box. We'll also be answering questions at the end. So tea break time, everybody. Go and get yourself something to drink, and feel free to put comments in the chat box about how it's going, any issues, and we'll see you in 10 minutes time. So it's 3:30 now, so we'll see you all back here at 3:40.
So I'm going to look at the Q&A box. Let's bring it up. So 3 questions. So I think I'll answer those before I go for my cup of tea. Hopefully people can see. So I'll go Q&A box, and then some things are coming up in the chat as well, actually. So with regards to salary contracts, do they have to follow BMA contract with regards to sick leave? So I'm not a contracts expert, but my understanding is that they need to offer the BMA standard contract, and that certainly was always the case if they had a GMS contract. And I think PMS practices should offer it, but could vary. And my understanding is that it has to be offered, but that if there's a mutual choice to vary, and I suppose that it's mutual, so that should only happen if it's in the interests of the candidate, then they can. As always, you're going to be getting advice on your contract from the BMA anyway, so refer to them for your advice. Bit of a specific question. When you interview, does it go against a candidate if their partner is in the military? I.e., would they need to move in 2 years' time? Should I avoid this coming out in any interview? So I would say it's not something that you would need to, well, it's a factor, isn't it? And if you're looking at a long-term relationship, I would say, be open with people. It might be the sort of thing actually on the informal visit to mention, because that you can test out these questions, these things that you worried that might be a deal breaker for a practice. Just throw them out there at the informal interview, casually, and see how they respond. Gauge the response. That's what I would do with that. I think, does it go against people? I think it's going to depend on the practice, I think. So it will be different. And you might find actually some practices, it might be a plus. They might have military families who work in the practice, or, personal experiences in that area, and it might be a plus point. So I would bring it up. Let's see. Do you think that practices are looking for anything different during their recruitment interview process because of COVID? That's interesting. I think some practices are probably holding, so they're very busy. So I think they might be holding off recruitment activity because they're busy, because they've experienced a reduction in workload and they're not quite sure what the future will look like. And some practices might be thinking, can we profile our workload in a different way? And they're perhaps not quite sure what they want, so maybe it's delaying things. I think that'll change a lot pretty quickly, and I personally anticipate a return to something that looks much more like business as usual. I think COVID might mean that people might want to ask about flexible working from home, those sorts of things, and those might be things that practices are more interesting exploring with people. Christine's come online. Christine, did you want to handle this job above about military?
Well, either the military, but also what are practices looking for?
Yeah.
Looking for people who will be flexible and work as a team, because we really don't know what's going to happen in the next few months. So that's a key attribute that we've always looked for, but more so in the next few months. And then while I'm on, regarding the military, 2 years is a long time, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good, clear answer, Christine, actually. That's really good. So just moving on to the next one in the box. Do you think that practices are looking for anything different during their we just talked about that. You mentioned being paid as a locum for a salaried job. How does that work? Interested. So it's become a more thorny issue because of this IR35 thing, which is, I believe, a tax rule about when you become an employee or not. So you have to be really careful not to fall foul of IR35. So you often have some interesting discussions with practice managers about that. So it used to be that you could come and say, oh, I'll locum for you for 6 months. And, that's fine. Then maybe I'll become salaried, maybe I won't. And that allowed that person to, they were running themselves as a limited company. And this meant they were a little bit cheaper actually to employ, because there weren't employers' pension contributions. Talk to an accountant about that, I think. But a number of things can be possible. So, hi, really good so far. Thank you. Can you give some guidance on the average salary locum GP rates in Notts, East Mids, which a newly qualified GP may be able to expect? What I'm going to do, I think we might leave this to the end, because as a sort of final question, so I'm going to make a mental note. I'm looking for a pen and paper, because it's something that I think would be good with the whole panel to see what people think. So if we can maybe park that one for the moment. Right. Do you have any advice for someone moving areas? CCG is 200 miles away, straight up. Right. So I did something similar, not 200 plus miles, but I moved from Birmingham to Nottingham. I already knew some people in Nottingham because it's where I went to medical school, but actually my GP network was really non-existent because I'd not been on the training scheme. How I coped, and it worked really well for me, was I joined the first 5 group, and actually I went on to kind of lead the first five 5 group because I found it really, really helpful, and that gave me monthly contact with peers to network, talk about jobs, things like locum rates, what practices were good to work for, maybe not so good for work for, who does or doesn't pay their bills on time, all sorts of useful intelligence like that. And also going to other educational events. I found that really, really useful. I think there's probably more electronic options now, so you tend to find First 5 groups have Facebook pages. A lot of faculty, RCGP faculties will. The LMC often run events that you can go to and network. So those would be my tips. And I'd say I wasn't shy to do a mail shot to 50 practices when I moved, and that was interesting to kickstart getting email addresses and to know people. Let's see what I think what I was getting at before was when I reached out to my ST1 practice to ask if they might be looking to be hiring when we finish ST3, and was invited straight away for an informal visit. In that case, would you go about preparing for things differently? At what point would you give a CV cover letter? So again, it depends on the practice, and you've got some intelligence here about what they might want or how they might want you to behave. But if you were behaving in the safest way to play this, I think, is to just throw the kitchen sink at it, really. Go along for an informal visit, do the same sort of research that you would have done anyway, and also I would do a covering letter, and you can stress those connections that you already have with the practice and people that you've worked with there before. So I would still do everything, I think. It's obviously, your final comment, would you consider this a positive step? Well, it's great. If they've worked with you, they know you, you know them. I mean, that's really good. And you'll know if you want to work there, though. I mean, it might be that you want a different challenge, or that that you see yourself somewhere different and don't feel that you have to go back just because they've asked you. Next question is, I'm interested in a salaried position. What is your opinion about being honest regarding family planning? Not yet pregnant and will need to undergo fertility treatment, and I don't want to be penalised for having other priorities. So I think people are different practices will have different attitudes. I think most practices are aware that the human race needs to continue and that people will have children. A lot of GPs are female. A lot of GPs, male and female, have children. So people are aware of these issues. That being said, on the other hand, it can sometimes be problematic for business, I guess, which is why people become worried about this. There are ways that people can claim money back for maternity leave, so it doesn't necessarily have as big a financial implications as you might think for practices. Would you be upfront about it? So I think I wouldn't hide anything. They obviously can't ask. I've had people be upfront about childcare and parenting issues in the other way. So sometimes people go out of their way to tell you that they've completed their family, to try and head off those sorts of concerns before they arise. I think I would only say it's a thorny issue. I think what I'm going to say is, don't hide anything. Be honest and upfront about it. Zarina, you've appeared on the video. Help me out here.
You've been doing a great job answering. You've been doing a great job at answering. Oh, I was just going to say you've been doing a great job answering the questions.
Can you
and
finish
what
that
we'll
question
do, those
for me?
that we haven't managed to answer, we've got a Q&A session at the end of the event. So we'll try and answer some of them as we go along, but also we've got them noted there. That's why we asked you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track of the ones we've answered and what's left.